Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Wells. I write horror, fantasy, and science fiction, and I talk about games on the internet. And today's video has been a long time coming. This is one that the Soulbound RPG for Age of Sigmar is one that I got over a year ago and have been struggling to review. And what it comes down to is that I really like the game system for this, and I really like the company that produces it. It's Cubicle 7. They do excellent work. The art is great. The quality is great. The gameplay is great. The trouble is that they're kind of saddled with a game setting that I don't really get. And this is Age of Sigmar. So if you've watched any of my videos before, you've probably seen me rave about the Warhammer Fantasy role-playing game. This is one of the very first games that I played in first edition back in the 80s, and have played every version since. I'm a big fan of the Warhammer world. Now, several years ago, I want to say 5 or 6, Games Workshop that owns Warhammer rebooted that entire world. And it is no longer the old world. It is a new one called Age of Sigmar. And it's very similar, but it's very different in a lot of very key ways. I say similar in that it still has, gods like Sigmar and the Chaos Gods, Nurgle, and, those sorts of things. It still has humans and elves and dwarves and so on, except the names have changed a little bit. On the tabletop side, the new Age of Sigmar stuff looks gorgeous. The models that they produce for it are incredible. On the role-playing game side, the setting itself, I struggle to connect with on some level. And this is not necessarily a fault of the setting, so much as it is I love the old world so much that the new one feels very distant to me. Anyway, I was recently sent the starter set. They've got a brand new starter set, big box set, and this is what finally cracked the nut for me. And so I want to give, after this big, 5-minute, whatever it's been, kind of caveat about how much I don't really like the Age of Sigmar setting, I want to give huge props to this starter set because it did finally present that setting in a way that makes sense in my head. I also want to give a big shout out to this dude, Darok. This is one of the kind of pre-made characters for this starter set, and I'm an absolute sucker for this. Look at that guy. He's a tree person with like branch antlers, and there's a squirrel living in him, and I love that piece of character art so much, and the concept of being able to play a tree, that's what made me buckle down and really read through everything. So, hooray for Darok. Anyway, let me give you the super brief overview. So the old world, the Warhammer Fantasy RPG that I rave about all the time, that is incredibly grounded. It is kind of a low fantasy, low magic, grim, medieval, gutter level perspective. The characters that you play are poor, they are weak, they are often powerless in the face of unfathomable evil. And in fact, the Enemy Within campaign that is kind of the big flagship campaign for the setting is basically like a medieval Cthulhu, almost. That there are big, scary monsters behind the scenes pulling strings, and your characters have to go through this incredibly dangerous world and kind of uproot and uncover these conspiracies and these webs of intrigue and lies and cultists and so on in the middle of this kind of late medieval, early Renaissance grimy little fantasy world. I absolutely love that kind of stuff. And for whatever reason, the kind of flagship setting has been changed. What Age of Sigmar is the end of the old world. It kind of was destroyed and reborn, and there's a whole mythology around it, and it doesn't really matter. The point is, ultimately, that the Age of Sigmar is like a new version of similar things. And in this one, the setting is no longer the old world, this kind of analogous Europe thing called the Empire. The new setting has 8 mortal realms, and these are connected kind of different dimensions or realities. There's one that is aligned with fire, and so everything is desert or it's very hot. There's another one that's aligned with darkness. There's another one that's aligned with light, and that's where the god lives, Sigmar. And so there's all these different things. There's one called the realm of beasts. There's one called the realm of plants or the realm of life. And you can move between the mortal realms through realm gates. And so what that does for the tabletop miniatures game is it gives you the opportunity to have these incredibly ornate and varied kind of tables to fight on. If you want to fight in a desert, there is a plausible magical reason for literally any characters to be fighting in a desert or in, mountain peaks or in dungeons, because all the different worlds with their distinct themes are connected by these magic realm gates. Part of what makes it difficult for me to get into the mortal realms as a setting is because I don't know where the poor people live. I don't know where the food comes from. I don't know kind of who the common man is and what he does and how he survives. And that's because the focus of the setting has shifted to incredibly high magic, big ornate things. There's technology everywhere. There's vast cities. There's skyscrapers. It is still a magical setting. There are, for example, trains and airships, but this doesn't look steampunk, and it doesn't look 1920s style the way Eberron does, for example. It's still a high fantasy, epic, magical setting, but with a lot of these just big, over-the-top, enormous cities and incredibly amazing, wonderful new sights to behold and locations, and all the characters are larger than life as well. Gone are the things like rat catchers and, agitators, and I shouldn't say those are gone, because Cubicle 7 is still producing the Warhammer Fantasy role-playing game concurrent with this one. I own both. You can own both. You can play anything you want. But if you want to play Soulbound, it is specifically because you are looking for this grand, larger-than-life, magical technology kind of gonzo fantasy setting, in which you can play as a tree or as these other kinds of, big things. So once I kind of got my head around that, and what really sold it for me more than anything else, in addition to the picture of Darak, was the setting book. Just like the Warhammer Fantasy starter set includes a big thick book about a town called Ubersreich, this one has the same thing for a town called Brightsphere. And if the over-the-top epic fantasy, big crazy magic stuff sounds really exciting to you, and if the art and the cool characters sound like something you want to try, the starter set is such a perfect way of getting into it, because it shows you the characters, and then it has this book about a city. And so you can learn everything about what this city is like, and what it's like to live in this world, and so on, and so on, and so on. So, let me show you what's in the starter set, because the Warhammer Fantasy starter set is, I think, the best one I've ever seen. This one is on par with that. Cubicle 7 does an absolutely phenomenal job putting these together. So again, we've got our big box, Soulbound starter set. Inside, the lid of the box is basically a GM screen or a shield, and it's got different little stats and things about how to run the game. You are going to get some dice. These are literally just normal 6-sided dice. There's a cool symbol on the 6, but it doesn't matter. You can play with any dice you want. In addition to the stuff inside of the box, there are several little reference sheets for how combat work, how spells work, different rules like that. Then you are going to come to the Premade Characters. Well, before you get to the Premade Characters, there's actually this thing that says, read this first. This is kind of designed for people who haven't roleplayed before, but as someone who has roleplayed a gazillion times, I still find this really cool and useful. This little read this first thing is mostly just letting you know the very basics of what a role-playing game is and so on. And then they've got this cool little party tracker sheet on the back that we can talk about later. But now let's talk about the pre-made characters. So there are 5 of them. And all of them look like this. Well, let's show you first of all. There is Zanbemir, this priest dude. And then there is Imran Sealgare, who's like a water elf. There is Malgradainson. And I said it wasn't really steampunky, although this picture is kind of putting a lie to that. The dwarves in this world are called Duardin, and they have incredible technology. This little weird thing on his back is like a, almost like a brass personal airship that helps him fly, and he's got all kinds of guns and weapons and things. There is Vel Arturius. Vel Arturius is a knight, and specifically what is called a Stormcast Eternal. One of the, let's call it an innovation, one of the things that Age of Sigmar did was they brought the fantasy stuff in line with the 40K stuff a little bit, their science fiction setting. And the Stormcast Eternals are kind of sort of like a space marine. They're these incredibly powerful, effectively immortal warriors. And then, of course, there is Darak, the Kurnoth Hunter, who's really cool. Now, let's show you Darak. So, the front side of every one of these little things, it's like a bifold thing, the character sheet. And on the front here, there's going to be, and you can't see this super well, but there's quotes to give you a sense of their personality. There's a little description of who they are, what is he like, and then why would you play them. And so this is the kind of thing where you show up at your gaming table, you're like, hey everyone, we are going to play Soulbound this week. Okay, cool. And then you just pass these out, and without opening them up, you can look at the character art on the back, and you can look at this stuff on the front, and you can kind of pick which character sounds good to you. And maybe, in like my case, you just really respond to the art. Or maybe you love the things, like why play Darak? Smart team player that has special skills, excellent at long-range combat, knows much about the wild, and is remarkable sneaky for his size. So you can kind of choose then, well, this one sounds really cool. I want the one who has magic powers. I want to be a tough frontline fighter. You know, whatever the little blurbs are for each character, and everybody knows, kind of picks one they want. Then you open them up, and inside you're going to get this sidebar that's all background, and this is my very favorite part. There are goals, connections, and secrets. And these are things for you to pick. So, for example, every character has 3 goals, and you as a player pick and circle the one that you want. And so your version of Darak is going to end up being very different from anyone else's version of Darak. You could even presumably play these again, and everybody could pick different things, and still have a relatively new experience, because somebody picks a different goal, and they pick different connections, and they have different secrets. And so you have a chance to have a pre-made character, but also to customize them, which is really slick. The other sidebar is a little explanation of the character sheet. What is on it? Just more advice, similar to those handouts, of how to play. The actual character sheet itself is going to be easier for me to just show you on the big PDF. So let's go there. Faltering Light is the adventure that is inside of the thing, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But I'm going to show you Darok's character sheet. So, what we can see here is the stats, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how this game works. The dice mechanic is kind of a classic attribute plus skill, combine them and roll some dice system. And as you can see here, every skill has a certain amount of training and a certain amount of focus. Training are dice, focus is +1 bonuses. So if Darok, the hunter, is going to, let's say, stealth, because it's one of the things he's really good at, that could be, for example, your game master will say, roll stealth. That's body stealth. So you take 3 dice for body, and then over here he's got 2 dice for stealth. So he rolls 5 dice. Good job. And every skill is going to have 2 numbers. Every skill test, I should say, has 2 numbers. The first is the difficulty, the number you have to roll. And the second one is the quantity, how many of them you have to roll. And this sounds a little weird, but I actually really like in practice how this works, because it's very variable. So for example, the typical roll, the average roll in this game is a 4-1, meaning you have to roll at least a 4, but you only have to roll 1 of them. So if he is going to stealth here, he takes his 3 body dice and his 2 stealth dice, he's rolling 5d6s, and if at least one of them gets a 4, he's succeeded. Congratulations. If something is going to be more difficult, maybe it's a 5-1. Or if something is very easy, maybe it's a 3-1. In extreme cases, in certain combat situations, you might end up with just 2-1, meaning you have to roll a 2, and you only have to roll 1 of them. And if you have a whole bunch of dice, obviously that's going to be very easy. And so you have 2 knobs, so to speak, in order to increase the difficulty of tests. You can change the number you have to roll, and you can require extra dice. So if something is going to be very difficult, maybe you bump it up to a 5-1, or maybe you keep it at a 4-2. So you have to roll a 4, 50-50 chance, but you have to do it twice. And so there's a lot of different variability in there. And of course the game has instruction for a game master on when you should raise the difficulty number and when you should raise the quantity number and how to manipulate those knobs effectively. Okay? What focus does is it lets you do a +1. So if good old Darok here is trying to attack somebody with his bow, then let's say that's going to be a body skill again. Body plus ballistics skill. So 3 + 1. So he's rolling 4 dice. But he has, you can see right there, he has a focus in it. So if one of those dice only rolls a 3, he could bump it up. He has 1 bonus point that he can add to any die to change its number and maybe get it up above that threshold. And this is useful because all the extra successes that you roll can give you extra things. If you are casting a spell, extra successes let you overcast and make the spell more powerful. When you are in combat, all of the successes that you roll become damage. Let's take a look down here in, the very bottom section here. It says attacks. So he has a great bow. His pool is 4d6, and we saw that, right? 3 from body, 1 from ballistic skill, so that's 4d6. He gets +1 focus in it, which is great, and then the damage is 1 plus S. S means successes. So if I roll 4 dice, and I get a 5, a 5, a 3, and a 2, I can use my focus to turn that 3 into a 4, and now I've got 3 dice that have succeeded. So I hit, and then how much damage do I do? Well, 1 plus my successes, which was 3, so I do a total of 4 damage. Yay, me! Damage is applied to the enemy, and they can subtract their armor from it just as a straight damage reduction. Once your toughness is wiped out, then you start accruing wounds. Most bad guys don't have wounds. You just wipe out their toughness and they drop. Player characters, of course, can become wounded, and there's all kinds of extra complications that can pile on from there. It's, in general, a fairly simple system, and I really enjoy it. The one part of it that I do think is a little onerous is this combat ability system. Okay? Every character and every creature in the game has a melee attack stat, a ranged attack stat, and a defense stat. And what you're trying to do is this table down here in the corner. Let me zoom way in on this. Boop, boop, boop. Oh no! So you can see what we're looking at. Oh! Come here. Doop. Show us the ladder. Show us the ladder. All right. So, and I'll move this there. You should be able to see that just perfectly. This is, like I said, the one kind of onerous part of the game system. If you're trying to attack someone, you compare your attack skill, whether that's melee or accuracy, against their defense. And so if I am average attack and you are average defense, then they are equal, and I need to get at least a 4 in order to hit you. If my attack is way higher than yours, maybe I only need a 2. If my attack is way lower than your defense, maybe I need to get a 6, and so on. This feels like the kind of thing that would slow combat down. The first round is when it's mostly going to be felt because everyone's going to be like, okay, wait, what do I need to roll to hit this guy? And in most systems, you're just able to say, well, you need to roll a 15 or whatever. And in this one, you have to say, well, that depends. What is your attack number? And let's compare it to this thing. Let's compare it to his defense, and then let's look at the chart, and then let's figure out. So it just is extra steps. Once you've established that, after the first attack against any given target, future attacks will presumably go much smoother. I don't know. It just feels like frankly, a very Warhammer way of doing things. That's a lot, I think, of how the tabletop game works, and they might have leaned into that a little bit. Anyway, on top of that, of course, there are talents that you have that you can do. There's fun things there. The combat system also has metal. This, what here is called metal, and everyone has these metal points that can be used to do cool things like attack in extra time or increase your damage and so on. And what's really cool about that is that everyone regenerates 1 metal every round. Some characters start with extra. Their maximum metal will be higher. But there's no reason to save this because you get a new one every single round of combat. So what that does is that makes combat really dynamic and really interesting because you have this little token you can cash in, and there's lots of neat things you can do with it. We should also talk about soul fire. Every character is going to have some kind of soul fire, or rather I should say, every character adds soul fire tokens to the party, unless you're a Stormcast Eternal, but that's beside the point. Soulfire tokens are similar to metal tokens, except they don't regenerate every round. You only get... They regenerate at the start of each session. And they can do incredible stuff. For example, you can spend a point of Soulfire to just declare that all of your dice have rolled 6s. And so if you really need to do a lot of damage, or if you really need to make sure to hit a difficult target, you can spend that Soulfire and say, every die just rolled a 6. I have absolutely hit him, or detected him, or convinced him, or whatever it is that you really need to do. It's a similar mechanic, kind of, sort of, to like hope points in the One Ring, or various other systems that have these cool little currency bits that you can use. I really like Metal and Soulfire. I think they're both really great. The one and only complaint I have about the game system is that weird little ladder for attack numbers and comparing the defenses. Everything else about the game system is pretty slick. Now, after we have looked at the character sheets, the next thing you're going to see in there, and I kind of spoiled this a little bit already, let's show you this. There is the Brightsphere City Guide. And this is the big, thick book. I mean, not thick, but for a starter set adventure, this is pretty impressive. This is, what is it? 64 pages, which is awesome. And this thing goes through an entire city. And the city of Brightsphere exists in the mortal realm called Akshi, which is the realm of fire. So it is a big, hot, oppressive desert. And Brightsphere in particular is really interesting because it has, A, been very recently reclaimed from the forces of chaos, meaning that there are still some chaos holdouts living in the city. And B, there is one of those realm gates that I talked about buried under the city. That is technically not public knowledge, but it is literally the very first thing you learn in this adventure is you've been called there to go down underground and figure out how to activate that realm gate. And it's a realm gate that most realm gates will just connect one point to one point. This one, they think, can connect any realm to any realm. That you, or technically to this one, to Akshi. You can travel to any of the 8 realms from a single point, potentially making Brightsphere the most valuable city that the forces of order and justice possess. So it's this huge thing. The city itself, let me see if I can find some cool pictures of it inside. You can kind of see what I mean by big, over-the-top, magical fantasy city. It's this huge metal spires and skyscrapers, and what's particularly cool about it, you can kind of see these balls there. The city itself is an orrery. Here's a good view. An orrery is a little mechanical device that kind of charts the movement of the planets in a solar system. And it's a clockwork thing that turns at precise rates so that it shows you that when this planet is over here, this other planet will be over here, and they'll eventually align because they move at different speeds, so on. That's what an orrery is. The city of Brightsphere is a dimensional orrery that shows how the 8 mortal realms combine. And so there is a lower city down here, and then there is an upper city that is on top of this huge metal platform that rotates slowly. And all of these kind of representations of the different mortal realms move around. And then, of course, there is the sphere itself, where the city gets its name, which is a gigantic tower in the middle of the lower city and the upper city. And down at the bottom, in the undercity, underneath everything, is where they think this realm gate might be. There's a lot in here. The book is huge. Let's take a look here at the table of contents so you can see just a lot of really good detail on the city itself and what it contains, and crucially, going back to my rant at the beginning, lots of information on what it's like to live here. What is it like to live in the mortal realms? What kind of people live in the mortal realms? If you are a soulbound hero whose the gods have come down and touched you and connected you to the other heroes in the party so that you are all connected to each other, and you have incredible powers, what does that mean? And how do you interact with the rest of the world? And what kinds of people are you going to find? And what kinds of stories can you tell in this world? This book about Brightsphere answers all of those questions in a really great way. The starter set also contains maps. There's a map of the city of Brightsphere itself, and then there's a map of most of the plane of Akshi. And the inside back cover of the box itself also has this same map. So there's plenty of maps of the realm of Akshi. Last of all, there is this one, and I showed you this before, Faltering Light. This is an adventure set in the city of Brightsphere. It's not as thick as the World Book. What's really great about this is that it teaches you the rules as you go. You don't have to actually have read any rule book in order to run people through this adventure. Because as you go through, here, let's just show you. So, there's going to be some minor spoilers for the very beginning of this adventure. So everyone takes their characters and you hand them out, and they mark what their connections are going to be. And then there's a little thing here that has information for the game master, and then it has little read aloud sections to tell things to the players. And then it has a description of how to make a dice test. What happens when you succeed, what happens when you fail. Here you can see DN41 Mind Lore, which means you need to roll at least a 4. You have to do it once. You take all your mind dice, you take all your lore dice, and it explains how this all works together. And so you go through, you can do that. There are more opportunities for this. It explains more little bits of things and gets you into the story. You're eventually going to find, you get into a fight. And the first time you get into a fight, there's a sidebar that explains the combat section and all these sorts of things. It's a really well-designed adventure that introduces not only the rules, but the setting. It helps you to delve into the city of Brightsphere, and by extension, because of the other characters involved, and because the adventure focuses around a realm gate, the adventure kind of helps you understand how the mortal realms work, and the fact that all the different players, all the characters came from different realms and then united here as part of this mission. So that's the starter set. Soulbound is a very different game than I am accustomed to, setting-wise. The setting is not what I was expecting coming from a Warhammer background. But honestly, nothing that I've described to you is inherently weird as fantasy settings go. There's nothing, for example, the Ravnica setting for D&D that comes from a Magic the Gathering set. That is also big, over-the-top magical cities and elevated technology and crazy magic and powers well beyond the human norm. That's how a lot of adventure gaming works. And so it's probably much easier for most other people to get into the Age of Sigmar setting than it was for me. But like I said in the beginning, this starter set is what finally broke the camel's back. This is what made me not only a fan of the game system, which I love, but also the setting itself, which I now finally understand and really enjoy. I've got a lot of other Soulbound books. They produce so many incredible, cool-looking things for the line. And so now that this starter set has made me a fan, I'm going to go back and I'm going to review the core book and some of the other, source books and adventures. And so we'll see those coming up in the future. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I ran long, but I don't mind because I really think this is a wonderful starter set and I wanted to make sure to explain exactly what's in it and why it's so great. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Standard rigmarole there, but also check out some of my books. I'm an author, and you can find my books linked down below. You can also just look me up on Amazon, and it'll point you right to my stuff. I write horror, fantasy, and science fiction, as mentioned. I'm also a professional game master, and I can run a single session or a campaign for you and your friends, possibly even Age of Sigmar, Soulbound, if that's what floats your boat. I should mention that even if you don't have other people to play with, let me know, and there's a possibility we can put a group together. About half the groups that I run right now are total strangers looking for someone to play with, and we have made that happen and formed some really good friendships. So anyway, thank you again for watching. I am Dan Wells, and you are awesome.